Hello there, I'm Nick.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust, a charity for people affected by MS in the UK. We are here to help you make sense of MS.
Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down. So big warm welcome to anyone who's listening regularly to us, and also a big hello to anyone who's new here too. We are talk about lots of different things that impact your life of multiple sclerosis or the life of your family and friends. And today we're going to be talking all about sleep and MS. So we're going to be talking about some common problems that crop up with sleep, some potential ways that you might be able to improve your sleep. And I definitely like the sound of that because I do struggle too. So later on, I'll be talking to Professor Michael Bannister, who's written several books on sleep. And I actually also caught up as well with TikTok star Jo, otherwise known as the Yorkshire Wife, who lives with MS, and she's got really amazing TikTok videos. So you should definitely have a quick look on there when you get a moment. But very important that you listen to us first, of course. So we chatted all about sleep as well with Jo, because she really struggles too. And also it was really cool, Helena. We kind of just talked about her life with MS and like how she got started using TikTok and how she found it to be a sort of a creative outlet as well.
Yeah, she's great fun. It's worth it just going on TikTok just to have a look at her and her songs and things. I think she's very entertaining, but also very good for raising awareness about MS and things. Nick ended up doing both interviews this time. As during the time of the recording, I seemed to decide that it was a good time to get COVID again. So funnily enough, while you were chatting with Michael and Jo, I was more or less on that bed behind me sleeping. I found that COVID really floored me, and I slept more than I have in ages. Not to say that that's a good solution to get some sleep, because I don't know if it was great sleep exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so listeners will have to put up with me this week, I'm afraid, rather than yourself, Helena. But I'm sure it'll be okay.
I was just very jealous because I wanted to ask lots of questions, because I've struggled with sleep since I was a child. I know my parents always used to say, "Oh, Helena, she was a good baby and a good child, but apart from sleeping, she would never go to sleep." So it seems to still stay with me now, even though I am nearly 46, that I still not very good at going to sleep.
Hilarious. I can just imagine. I can completely picture that. Yeah. And like sleep problems are really common in the general population, but even saying that, they're even more common for people living with MS. So around half of people who live with MS will say that they experience disturbed sleep, and this is about 4 times higher. I can't believe that, 4 times higher than the general population. And despite this, sleep disorders still remain really underdiagnosed and untreated in MS. So we know that poor quality sleep and not enough sleep can really impact on daily life with MS. So it can lead to that daytime sleepiness and low energy levels. It can contribute to things like memory and make it really difficult to concentrate. I think lots of people who listen to this who live with MS will know that sort of cog fog, they call it, don't they? That can really worsen the next day after poor sleep. And then it can also impact things like mood, depression, anxiety, and also make other symptoms of MS like pain and fatigue much worse too.
And there are a few problems that can often occur, specifically sort of in MS, and the following are the most common sleep problems that we see in MS. And here's one I've kind of touched on before: insomnia, which is when you find it difficult to get to sleep or stay asleep for long enough. It may be that you wake up during the middle of the night and struggle to get back to sleep, or you wake up too early. That's would be the case of my youngest child. He likes to wake up very early, but I don't know if that's so much for poor sleep, just the case that's when he wants to get up, which doesn't always help when the rest of the family wants to sleep. Sleep-related breathing disorders, and this include chronic snoring and obstructive sleep apnea, which is also known as OSA. OSA causes you to repeatedly stop and then start your breathing while you sleep. And this is something that we see quite often people talk about on our Facebook group. So it's a fairly common thing, not only within the world of MS, but in the general population as well, I think. And periodic limb movement disorders. And this includes movements such as a sudden jerking or kicking out in your sleep. And other examples are restless leg syndrome. And this is something we see people talk a lot about on social media, which is an overwhelming urge to move your legs in bed.
Yeah, we definitely see, we saw that a lot from people when they were sort of contributing questions for this podcast, definitely. It's also really common that you can get that disturbed sleep in MS too. So MS symptoms that can make sleep really difficult or can interrupt your sleep. So I think people will, listening to this might go, yes, that happens to me. This happens to me too. So things like spasms, pain, of course, your mood. So we touched on anxiety and depression. And then also potentially some bladder and bowel issues as well. So there's nocturia, which is when you need to get up several times in the night to sort of pass urine, to pop to the toilet, which can really disturb your sleep. Of course, you're going to have those high levels of daytime fatigue, which can worsen a lot if you have that poor night's sleep. And of course, there are other MS-related factors that can really affect sleep too. So you might be taking some medication, and a side effect of that might be that you struggle with sleep. Or it might be the disease-modifying drug, or DMD, that you're taking that can affect your sleep too. Also, a lack of exposure to daylight, which at the moment, as we're recording this, it's like miserable weather outside here where we are in the south of England.
It's July, but it feels like it's the middle of the winter.
Doesn't it? Yeah, I bet when this comes out, it will be like heat wave or something.
Probably.
It sounds really dated, but not having that exposure to daylight can also really affect your sleep. Being less active or sedentary can also alter sleep patterns. And of course, having lesions in the area of the brain that control sleep, that of course can impact your sleep day to day as well.
So there's a lot to deal with. And of course, that's not taking in everyday life, such as stress, anxiety, having kids, like I mentioned, that like to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, perhaps, a snoring partner. I got one of those. Or noisy neighbors when you're trying to sleep. I had fun in last summer with fox that was running down our street and sounding like there was a murder going on the street, and kept on waking me up every night, which is very frustrating when it takes a while to get to sleep yourself, and then there is something to wake you up. So not only is there sort of MS related things, there's other things that we can't really control in life around us, like annoying foxes.
We've got like a fox gang going on.
Yeah, it felt like
it. Is that your noisy neighbour?
Oh, well, the noisy neighbors, they like to do lots of building and things, so
Right.
that you can actually go and tell them to stop. So they're normally quite good, but the fox don't seem to listen to that.
No, of course. And it was good you mentioned snoring, Helena, because or having a snoring partner. And unfortunately, I have to say that I am the snoring partner in my relationship. So I am the disturber, 100%.
See, both my parents used to snore, and I think it used to always be like my mum would go and sleep on a sofa somewhere to get away from my dad snoring. And then I would hear one person sort of snore in one bedroom and one person snore on the sofa. So maybe my bad sleeping comes from just having had people around me that just make too much noise all my life. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sure there's that children's story, isn't there, about the bear who's always trying to find somewhere to sleep.
Oh,
and he goes to
yeah.
sleep in his car or something. Peace at last. That's what it's called. Anyway, let's find out what we can do to get a good night's sleep. So first of all, we are going to kick things off by talking to Jo, who you might know as the Yorkshire Wife on TikTok. So she's going to tell us all about her problems with sleep. Sound good, Helena?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
Hi everyone, welcome back to our podcast on sleep and MS. Today joining us from the MS community, we've got Jo, who you might have seen on social media as the Yorkshire Wife, joining us. Hi Jo.
Hi Nick.
How are you today?
I'm good today, pretty stable today, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah, all okay on this end. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you on our podcast, just because we all follow you on TikTok and on social media, so it's great.
Thank you so much. I was so excited when you started following me.
That's it. Yeah, we've got some ways to go before we're up there with the Yorkshire Wife. Yeah. But for anyone who's maybe not familiar with yourself, Jo, would you be able to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Jo Mason, aka the Yorkshire Wife. I'm a 41-year-old former teacher who was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis in November 2021. And since then, sadly, had to leave my job as a teacher, but really found a new outlet in becoming a TikToker and sharing my MS journey and my life in general.
Amazing. Yeah, I didn't know you were a former teacher, because I'm a former teacher as well. So
Yay!
we can start a bit of an alliance. Yeah.
What did you teach?
Primary school. Yeah.
Oh wow, well done. Gosh.
Were you
Gosh.
upper?
Secondary, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a stint in primary as a theatre practitioner. And then, I found my home in secondary.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, good for you. Yeah, and you obviously mentioned sort of your diagnosis there in 2021. I was just wondering if you could sort of tell us a bit about that.
Yes, yeah. I was referred to neurology by my GP at the beginning of 2021. He had concerns about vestibular migraine. And then I went to neurology, had an MRI. And then it was in the June of 2021 when I started getting more poorly, having variety of symptoms, and throughout that summer was really struggling. And I remember the first day back after the summer holidays, I went back into work thinking, I'll click back in. I'll just click back in once I'm back into a routine, back into work. And I was sent home by lunchtime due to the symptoms I was struggling with. And then it was just over a week later, I had a lumbar puncture, and that found the positive oligoclonal bands and confirmed that at that point I was in an acute active flare, and then had the neurologist appointment in November 2021 when I was given the official diagnosis of RRMS.
Wow, that must have been such a shock, going in after the summer holidays, going back to work, and then to go through that. Yeah.
Absolutely, because that was the last day I worked. It was the last day that I was able to go into work. And almost after coming home on that day and the realization, no, I'm really not well here, I got worse and worse. And it was only then when I started my DMT in the March of 2022 that gradually things have started to improve somewhat in terms of the stability of my MS.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, things are a little bit more stable now. So
yeah, my new job is managing my MS symptoms.
It's a full-time job, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, it really is. And well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know sometimes when people talk about their diagnosis, such a difficult part of their life and their experience, it's not always easy to talk about. is it? So
It's
thank you.
not. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I did have talking therapy last year, which helped go through it all. And obviously on TikTok, I find sharing my journey, sharing my story, and hearing other people and knowing that you're not alone, that really has helped me.
Yeah, I mean, it must be such an amazing process. I mean, like we love your TikTok, so we've seen on there's lots of sort of very honest content about what you're going through day to day or hospital appointments, alongside lots of sort of light-hearted, silly videos and music and everything on there. So it's such a good take. On the MS. How did you kind of get into TikTok? What made you start that?
Well, I actually trained at LIPA in performing arts. That's what my degree is in, and was an actor and singer for a time, and then moved into teaching. Started off in theatre and education, then became a theatre practitioner for a local theatre company, and then went to gain my qualification in teaching, and have taught drama, music, and performing arts over the last years as a qualified teacher. And so when all of a sudden the world that I knew, being around hundreds of people every day, working on multiple productions and exam pieces, directing, choreographing, writing, being so creative, all of that stopped. And I was at home on my own in four walls around me. And day to day, I had no idea how life was going to be day to day. And I've always found being creative to be something for my own well-being that I've needed to do. And so I already had a TikTok account, because you have to learn TikTok dances when you're a drama and music teacher, and that adds them into everything, So I already had it for kind of, keeping down with the kids kind of thing. And then it was very much, right, I'm going to start documenting my life. I'm going to start doing this as a way to be creative, and I can do it in my own time. I can do it in those couple of minutes when I'm feeling okay. And I say it's just been such a huge creative outlet for me, where I can still perform. You get that audience, you get to tell your story.
That's it. Yeah. Amazing. It's really strange because I actually didn't kind of think about the creative side of it, that you were talking about, that creative outlet. It's really, really interesting that you say that still gives you that opportunity to perform and be creative and sort of put your own spin on things out to the world. I kind of, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking more of the side of it that you were saying, you were sort of documenting your journey with the MS community and that side of things. That's really interesting. But I was just thinking, as you were saying, that maybe not everyone might not want to be on TikTok, YouTube, stuff like that. But would you recommend keeping that creative outlet?
For me, it is so important. As I say, I have danced, sung, played musical instruments since being very, very tiny, both instilled into me by both my parents. And so it was always something that I needed to do. And actually, the relapse that led to my diagnosis took away my ability to play the piano like I used to be able to. And so for me, actually putting all these songs that I've always written into TikTok and recording them, that's been huge for me, because I've been teaching myself how to replay, and I can only really play chords and things now. But I found for me, it's so important. And some of the other MSs who are on TikTok, they have their own outlets. There's an amazing TikToker in America, Paige, who creates spray paint art.
Wow.
And she has found that to be such a wonderful outlet. I think it's important to keep something going for yourself. So lots of people, I'm gradually getting more and more into exercise, and I think that a lot of MSs find that. There are a few people who their MS allows them to still run, and so they build up taking part in marathons and things, which just blows my mind, and find other things to do. So I think you have to find what you personally love. And for me, it's being creative dramatically and musically.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's really, really, really good to hear that. And actually, it's really inspiring, I think, actually, that you were saying that you've adapted your creativity and you found a new outlet for it almost.
Yeah, I'm all about it's not what happens to you that makes you who you are, it's how you deal with it. And that's what I've been taught to do, how I've been taught to lead my life. So it is adapting. And it's not always easy. You know, you do have those days where you go, oh gosh, you long for your old life, you long for who you were. But if you keep plugging away now and adapting, you'll get there.
Wow, that's really really powerful. Thank you. That's great. It's been really great hearing about your journey, Jo, and how you've got to sort of where you are at the moment. With this podcast, we're kind of talking about sleep. We'll be interviewing Michael later, as a sleep expert. So, you know, with that in mind, obviously we had a bit of a conversation on social media about the podcast, etc. But with that in mind, do you struggle with anything sort of specifically with sleep and MS?
I do. I get mid-insomnia.
Oh, wow.
And so I don't have trouble getting to sleep. For me, it is middle of the night. I will suddenly jolt awake, and it's like I've been electrocuted. It just feels like bolt, boom, I'm awake. Almost, you know, that if someone shook you awake and there was an emergency, it's that kind of feeling. And then I know that I'm going to be awake for between 2 to 4 hours.
Wow.
Before I gradually then, right, I'm ready to sleep again. And
Wow.
I really struggled to deal with that because it would happen for a few nights on the run. Now it generally sort of happens at least once a week. And I've started to track. I have a device that I wear that tracks all sorts of things, but monitors my sleep. And it's really interesting because on the stress monitor on it, that jolt, I've now been able to see on a graph that it has a jolt in it, that my stress levels all of a sudden spike as I wake up. So, in the process of trying to look at this and to figure out if there are any triggers for it.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me asking, Jo, is that something that you've had for a long time, or is it something that's been more recent, that waking up in the middle of the night?
It's something that I've had for a long time, and it was only earlier this year that I actually found out that it was MS related.
Right.
So I'd always put it down to stressed at work, stressed, in something, or there's a lot going on in your life. And it's only as I have had to reduce stress in my life to help my MS, and it was still happening, that it's then right, okay, what is this? And it was only through my own research and trying to find things out that I realized, oh gosh, this is actually another symptom of MS.
Wow. Yeah, I guess when you kind of put the parts together, isn't it? And you realize that's why this is happening.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that everyone who has insomnia has MS, because I know them people, you can panic, but it does seem to be in line with what I've actually gone through.
Yeah, I guess we were talking off air, weren't we, Jo, as well? We were quite kind of saying You know, MS is so different for each person, isn't it? And some people, particularly with sleep, you know, it will affect some people really differently. Like yourself, you have that insomnia, whereas some people will really struggle to go to sleep, or some people will sleep all night and then have a lot of fatigue the next day. So it's so different, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. It comes back to it, doesn't it? The snowflake disease, how different every single person is. I've got a friend, an MSer, who it's the beginning of the night and struggling to get to sleep, and the restless leg syndrome that keeps them. Now, I get restless legs as well, but a weighted blanket helps with that. And it's been, yeah, the middle of the night for me. And then there are others who wake really early, and it totally impacts the next day, the next few days.
That's interesting you say about the weighted blanket and the tracker device, the watch device. That's, you know, it sounds like you're doing lots of different things to manage it as well.
Oh yeah, you've got to have a toolkit. You've got to pull a toolkit together, because hour to hour you can change. You really can, and day to day it changes, and something that works one week might not work the next. So yeah, there's been a few TikToks again about toolkits that we have, things to help us through. And I love my weighted blanket.
I really like that that expression, the toolkit. That's really I love that. And it's, you can have lots of different approaches and different, you know, bits of kit that you're using and that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, what can I use today? What'll work today?
Yeah. And you mentioned sometimes with sort of that poor sleep and your day-to-day life, how does that kind of impact on you?
Oh gosh, it's awful. I know that when I've had it, that the next day I need to cancel anything that I have in place, which is one of the reasons why I'm only able to volunteer at the moment, because it has that huge impact where I just can't function properly the next day. I am so lucky that I have a wonderful husband who just picks up the ropes and goes with it, and my family, my dad is amazing, and if I need help with the children's school runs, and something I've not been good at asking for help over the years, but now it's like I've got a core group of family and some close friends who are just on hand when need be, because it just can't function. I can't wake up the next day. I feel like I'm in a bubble. It exacerbates my symptoms. My pain levels are higher. My cognitive function isn't there. My legs don't work properly, my hands. So it absolutely has a massive impact the next day. And if I don't make those adjustments in that day and rest, then it impacts even longer, and you can have more of flare days.
That knock-on effect, isn't it? And then you have the poor sleep, then the next day's affected, and then if you try and push through, then the next day it's affected. The next day, absolutely.
Yeah. I always say there's always a debt to pay to MS. You've got to pay it back.
I like that expression too. And it sounds like you've got a really supportive network around you as well, in terms of family and friends. But as you say, asking for help it can be a big step to take, can't it? Whether it's to do with MS or in general life as well.
Absolutely, yes. But it's something that I think you've kind of got to get over that hurdle. You've got to get over that hurdle. And I say that, but I still struggle. It's still there, a barrier in front of me, because you don't want to feel a burden. And that is really hard.
Yeah, and I guess it's about building that understanding, isn't it, in your support network and people around you, and
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess they're never going to understand fully. You know, my partner lives with MS and I know what she's going through, but I can just every day just try and learn more and try to understand a little bit more so that you can help with things like the fatigue the next day, as you were saying.
And that's incredible. I think that's all. I know myself as an MSer, that's all we ever ask, is that people just try and understand that little bit more. And if you're doing that, then well done you. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, one day we'll get there one day. But yeah, if on the flip side, Joe, if you have a good night's sleep, when you are lucky enough to get a really good night's sleep, how does that kind of affect you the next day?
Oh, and I know if I've woken up and had a better night's sleep, and obviously I'm a tracker as well. Now you can't just say, if you had a good night's sleep, let me check on the app, and I'll tell you if I have. But with that, I am starting to get more of an understanding, and it's then I was talking about it on TikTok yesterday about spoons and the spoon theory. You feel like you're starting the day with more spoons. So then you can not only do the things you need to do, but you can have the opportunity to do the things you want to do as well. And so sleep, it's massive in helping you to get some of those nice life things in place as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And we saw some of your videos about this, how many spoons you have in a day. But I was wondering if you would be able to just kind of explain your take on the spoons idea.
Yes. I had a wonderful question from a follower who was asking, how many spoons do I start the day with? And again, it's so unique to each person. And it was working with an occupational therapist last year who helped me keep a diary of what activities, what things I needed to do during the week and things that I wanted to do, and able to look at how much time things took, because everything takes so much longer. And when you're talking about activities, it's not talking about something as a whole, it's breaking down, getting ready into actually having a shower, the drying, whether you're washing your hair that day, drying it's breaking all those little things down. Are my arms strong enough to be able to use a hairdryer that day, or do I need to let the curls go free and things like that? And then being able to keep a diary then helped me understand how much energy each task takes, and that then helped me think, right, okay, that's how much sort of one spoon takes, how much energy it takes. So then you can think, right, this is how many spoons I've got at the beginning of the day, and start to assign them throughout the day. And like, you link it back to sleep. If you've had a better night's sleep, you're then starting hopefully with more spoons in that day and can spend them wisely.
Yeah, that's great. And then you can kind of manage your day with how much energy you've got through the spoons idea. It's really cool. I love that. You mentioned sort of some other people in the MS community maybe who have some different difficulties from yourself sleeping. I was just wondering if you had heard of anyone else through your TikTok, some things that they find difficult too.
Yeah, it's finding what to do when you are awake. And quite a few people sort of trying to suggest different things that when it happens to them, and things that work for them. But it really was coming across that the difference is that for some people it's the neuropathic pain, it's those pins and needles, the restless legs, the pain at the end of the day that actually stops them from going to sleep. And those who wake up in the middle of the night, and things you can do to then help yourself when you find yourself in that position. And again, everyone's got different things that work for them. I think the biggest thing that's helped me is not getting cross at myself anymore.
Interesting.
Not getting annoyed at, and that's part of the understanding that actually it's part of my condition. I can't help this. I can try and figure out things to help, but it's not my fault. And I can and have to make the reasonable adjustments the next day. And the more that I've accepted that, I think the easier it has become.
Yeah, wow, that must be, again, I imagine that's a big step to get to that position, isn't it, where you accept what's going on.
Absolutely.
And then find ways to manage it, and you understand it more. But I think everyone, whether you live with MS or not, it's really easy to beat yourself up, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, because you always wonder, what have I done to exacerbate the symptoms? And then you feel guilty letting people down, and yeah, it's like a little hamster wheel you're on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Joe. Again, that's quite personal. I know you do this all day, don't you, on your TikTok, but actually it's really powerful to talk about these things.
Thank you. I think it's so important, and somebody's got to do it, haven't they?
That's it. Yeah. In your, you were saying sort of about your toolkit with sleeping, and you've got your weighted blanket and your tracking device. Have you got any kit that helps you at all?
For me, with sleep, it's the very first thing I try to do now that I know that I get that jolt awake. It's been a process of telling myself, you've got a bit of a window here, you might get back to sleep. So instead of that, I can't believe I'm awake again, and that frustration, now that I'm recognise that jolt awake, and because obviously we all awake at different times during your sleep naturally, but I know that difference in that jolt, that I almost try and talk myself back into sleep. And on occasion that has worked. So that'll be the very first thing that I do. But then I do get up out of bed, and I do have just a little walk in the house, have a drink, go to the bathroom, and try to come back to bed as well, to almost give myself that chance to sort of calm myself. But then I'll know if it's going to be this is a longer period. I also use autogenic relaxation techniques and talk myself through tension and release in my body to try and help myself. But that only sort of works once I've come through to that point of I'm ready to sleep again. I'm ready. My body's through this now. And you kind of go, I'm on this curve, I'm on this bit, and that then helps me to go back to sleep.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like you get to that point, and then you'll go through some different processes and really try and understand what's going on and get yourself back into the right place to sleep, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. And if not, then I am sometimes really bad and sit on Candy Crush. And I know not to be on a device, but I know that I'm going to be awake no matter what.
Yeah.
And that I know now that I come through to that point. So yeah, go through a few levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. That's great. And I think we can all look out for some toolkits online, whether or not they're sleep, fatigue, managing different symptoms. That's great. That's really good advice. Just finally, Joe, for you, that you would love to find out about MS and sleep.
Oh, I would love, now that I've started using the tracker, and now that I've got more of an understanding of what happens to me, that if you're speaking to a specialist, I would love to know if what I go through, that jolt awake and then this almost curve, if that is something that they're familiar with, and something, whether they've got any other helpful tips or advice for how I can either shorten that kind of curve, or anything that I can do, because I never know what's going to happen. I still can't find any triggers. You reduce caffeine intake and all sorts. Think about when you're eating, think about when you're exercising. But yeah, if they understand that mid insomnia and have got any advice, I'll take it. I'll put it in my toolkit.
Where can people find you if they want to look out for you online?
Oh, thank you. On TikTok, I am the Yorkshire Wife. That's my main platform. I'm just emerging on Instagram and Twitter as the Yorkshire Wife, and I think you can find me as Yorkshire Wife 1981. My age in there as well, and on Twitter as well. And the songs, my silly songs that I write, I do put those on YouTube as well under the Yorkshire Wife as well.
Oh, brilliant. So we'll have to look out for those. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for talking about your experiences with sleep, and for talking about the community and everything that you do. It's amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much as well.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take this opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Yeah, and a really good thing that we do is our website, and there's specifically the information and resources on our website. So there to help anyone whose life is affected by MS, whether you live with MS, you're a family member of someone with MS, or you know someone with MS. And there's plenty of information on there. So it's mstrust.org.uk. And on there, you'll find lots of information about sleep. So if you head to Z section of our website, so it's the A to Z of MS. So of course, if you head to that S tab, you're going to find information on sleep, but also on there you're going to find information on different disease modifying treatments, symptoms, accessing healthcare. Literally anything that you can think of with MS should be on there, and we should have that information to help you out. So do head over to our website. Again, that's mstrust.org.uk.
And now let's hear what Professor Michael Bannister has to tell us about how we can improve our sleep. Can't wait to listen to this.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We're joined today by Professor Michael Bannister, who's going to talk to us all about sleep today. Hi Michael.
Hi there, nice to see you.
Obviously we're going to be talking all about kind of sleep issues and MS and sleep. I think when we've discussed before kind of at the Trust, I think MS and sleep is such a big issue, but we also find that lots of people sort of deal with different issues with MS and sleep. So we have some people who really struggle to go to sleep, or we have some people who wake a lot during the night, or we have some people who will sleep all through the night but then will still feel really fatigued the next day. So our conversations, we were kind of thinking if we talk about sleep in general and have some tips about what you might be able to do if you find yourselves in one of those situations. But I think giving very specific advice might be quite difficult, as it's such a varied condition, and sleep, it varies so much from person to person living with MS.
No, absolutely, and in general, I mean, there's it's sometimes we might hear things about sleep that, I don't know, say there's a magic number of hours or something like this, but the reality is there's so much variability between us as individuals that there's rarely a one size fits all, and I think that's something we'll probably talk about as we chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone can relate to that, can't they? Everyone can relate to that. We kind of talk about sleep hygiene, and you see this term quite a lot, sleep hygiene. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in its broadest sense, it's kind of referring to, I suppose, practices and habits maybe that we can move into, behavioral habits, that is, that can help us promote, I don't know, healthy and restful sleep. So, that might be things like having a consistent sleep schedule. So that would mean, going to bed at a regular time and waking up at a regular time. Pretty much, every day of the week, really, where you can. I mean, it's often sometimes at weekends those things might get get knocked off, but a good kind of sleep hygiene schedule is thinking about that sleep-wake cycle. So is that looking regular? It's thinking about other things like, I suppose, maybe limiting consumptions of caffeine and alcohol and stuff like this. And I'm sure we might talk about this a bit more, but something like caffeine, for instance, that can stay in your system for several hours. So, often when we might be having that cup of coffee in the afternoon, or that cup of tea maybe in the evening, the caffeine in that may impact our likelihood to fall asleep. So it's thinking about where do we manage that. Sleep hygiene also these days with technology and so forth also includes thinking about how much blue light are we letting into our systems late at night through our devices like tablets and phones and stuff like this. So it's really trying to build those habits around healthy behaviors that maybe might aid our sleep, because there's all these subtle things in our environment that might shift us. And of course, another one that I'm sure we'll come back to is also temperature can have a big effect. So it's making sure, our rooms that we're sleeping in have that kind of nice kind of coolness to move into. They're not too hot, etc. So all these kind of factors really kick into it.
So many different factors, aren't there? Wow. Just as I was listening to you, I was thinking, yes, I do sit on my phone quite late sometimes. Yes, I do have the odd cup of coffee that's too late in the day.
Yeah, and we're all guilty of it. I mean, I do the same too. I can come and talk to you, and I'm aware of all the importance of these factors. But I'm certainly not a sleep saint or anything like that.
A sleep saint, yeah. Maybe after talking to you today, I will be. Yeah. How important is it to have like a good night's sleep? Maybe, as you were saying, sort of to be in that cycle of resting and then waking.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of studies out there now showing that sleep can be really beneficial for things like our well-being, and I suppose what we might call our optimal functioning throughout the day. What I mean by that is, I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that. If we're feeling more tired, we may find a range of activities slightly more harder. That might be our emotional regulation. We might find it harder to regulate our emotions. It might be our concentration slips. We've had less good sleep, and there is now lots of evidence coming out across a range of different groups. Both kind of, I suppose, healthy individuals, but also people with a variety of different medical experiences, and across age groups and things like this as well, showing that sleep plays a really important factor, or is an important factor, really pretty much across all walks of life. You see that in terms of its impact on our social relationships, its impact on our mental functions, our memory, our ability to plan, our ability to be creative. There's a whole range of different areas that sleep gets linked to, right the way through to also things like our mood, right? So how we're emotionally feeling, and the physical health components of it as well, because increasingly consistently reduced sleep can have impacts on our physical health as well. So it kind of kicks in several levels.
Wow. Yeah. And I think anyone listening to this who lives with MS, I think it'll be a very common feature that if you have a poor night's sleep, actually, symptoms can be a lot more difficult the next day, which is really interesting listening to you talking about how many different aspects of the body it can impact the next day.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And when you mentioned temperature, how does that help you sleep? So I know I'm quite terrible at, I quite like to be quite hot when I go to sleep and have lots of covers on and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so when we talk about temperature, it's actually slightly to do with, also connected to, I suppose, the release of hormones that happens in the body. So there's certain hormones that kick in the process of running up to sleep, things like melatonin. People might have heard about this as a common kind of hormone, and temperature can regulate the release. So actually, if often you kind of do want to be going into a slightly more cooler environment to sleep in. I know we might get under our duvets and want to be cozy and warm, and that doesn't necessarily mean the environment is not cool around it, right? So temperature can play quite an important role, and of course throughout the night temperature is important as well, right? So I'm sure many of us can remember a time when maybe we overheat during the night and it keeps us up and keeps us restless in that way. So temperature cuts on a range of different levels. One is the temperature of the room that we're sleeping in. It's often ideal to have that a little bit cooler than the room we're in beforehand. I say often because, as I said earlier, there's maybe not always a one size fits all to this. There will be subtle variations in that. And Then of course the other factor is, yeah, throughout the night, what kind of temperature are we sharing in the room? And that can also be impacted by the person sleeping next to us, if you happen to be sleeping next to someone as well, right? Because that body close to you will also emit heat and things like this. So there's a range of factors contributing to things like temperature and sleep.
Wow, yeah. Is there kind of an ideal temperature range, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a really hard one to put your finger on. There's all sorts of different estimates. I mean, a lot of the times the conversation is to actually try to ensure it's a cooler space, right? So it's kind of, you're not moving from one very cool room to a suddenly really hot room, right? That kind of dynamic. So it's more about the relative shift, rather than us saying, here's the optimal perfect temperature to set your room at. I mean, you know, because on the flip side, you could set your room to be too cold, right? I'm sure some of us can also recognize that side to it. So, you know, it's not quite a nice, neat, linear pattern where we can say, right, this is the optimal component, at least to my knowledge, you know, of the work that I've done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so not freezing, I guess that's a good takeaway, isn't it? You don't have
exactly.
to go. Yeah. So you obviously mentioned a few things already in terms of things like caffeine and alcohol and the temperature. Do you have any kind of good tips for getting to sleep?
Yeah, I mean, some of this is, I suppose it goes back to what we were talking about sleep hygiene early on, right? And I mean, you know, some components are looking at establishing things like a regular sleep schedule. So often, if you get your body into that routine of going to bed at a similar time, getting up at a similar time, over time that will start to pay off, right? So there's a level of consistency that can be really helpful. And that, of course, requires sometimes a bit of patience to get there. You know, it's very easy to say be consistent in your sleep pattern, but if you're struggling to get that going, I know that can be a real challenge. So I think there's that side to it. I mean, every individual may look to set up their own different type of relaxing nighttime routine, because part of the sleep, a regular going to bedtime, also is all the behaviors in the build up, right? And that might be in the afternoon. If you're someone who is finding caffeine's keeping you up, you might start pulling back on that earlier in the day, right? You might start to have some of these kind of components. And, you know, of course, bear in mind, even decaf does still have some form of caffeine in it. So there's layers to that as well. I mean, I'm not saying people need to completely pull that out, but, you know, from one person to another. But so often thinking about your routine for sleep, sometimes that can start really early in the day. You know, we don't often think about it that way, but it might be looking at that component. But there'll be other things that people might do. People might have certain things they look to do in the evening. I don't know whether it's reading a book or doing some kind of like gentle stretch or some kind of meditation. There's all these different dynamics. It would be remiss of me to say this is the optimal for everybody, because everyone's got their own routine, and I suppose that will vary. But I think those are certain things to keep in mind. I mean, things like limiting the exposure. I spoke about that before, to electronic devices. You know, because those can certainly also have an impact. So these are some of the components. I mean, there's other things that can play out as well, though, right? And I don't know. I mean, perhaps it's just me. Well, I know other people do experience this, but have you ever had a time when you just can't sleep and you're just lying in bed and the thoughts are going around, and maybe you hear the clock ticking, and you just hone in on that clock ticking, right? Those types of scenarios are often, you know, really difficult to deal with, and actually sometimes can just increase your anxiety, right? Because you start getting frustrated. I can't sleep. Oh, I can't. And so sometimes, you know, if you look at some of the advice that comes out around sleep, if you look at things like Matthew Walker's book, for instance, Why We Sleep, it's a really good popular science book about sleep. And, you know, talks about, you know, sometimes it's better just to step out of the bed, right? If you're at a point where, you know, you've gone 15, 20 minutes, you can't get that, maybe you need to change, just step away, reset the barometer, as it were, and then get back in. So there is a big part of sleep, which I think is about, I suppose, anxiety regulation, and particularly when you're having sleep problems, right? Because we sometimes fall into a bit of a vicious cycle with sleep, whereby, you know, having poor sleep regularly can impact things like our anxiety and our emotion regulation. The fact that we then become more anxious, and we might start to become more anxious about sleeping, we then start to stress over sleep while we're trying to sleep. And that has an impact on us having poor sleep, which then has another impact on our anxiety. So it does become really difficult. And in some cases like that, I mean, if people are having really serious issues like that, I mean, I think it is important to also talk to practitioners about it. There's a lot now of things like CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy approaches that can help people with the anxiety regulation. And some of those are, some of them are now used with technology and computerized. There's various apps that do it. And I've just, maybe I won't recommend a specific app because I think that's probably not going to be the best message to put out there. But what I would say is, talk to your general practitioner, talk to the medical professionals who work with you, because it is so nuanced, right? CBT might not be the best approach for one person, but it could be for another, and an app might not be the best way. And so you just want to try and look at those components. Sleep is very much a multifaceted thing, as we're already talking about, right? You've got these environmental factors, but you've also got these kind of psychological internal factors, and we've got to try and think, how do you balance that mixture? And then of course you throw medication into that mix and all these other factors as well. So it is really important to talk to practitioners as you approach it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you say that, because we recently had a survey about mental health and MS. And we found that, many people living with MS experience anxiety and depression. And I just wonder what that link is like for sleep, that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that, people with poorer sleep tend to have higher rates of things like anxiety and depression. Of course, it's incredibly hard to pick all of that apart because a lot of this research is correlational, right? People don't, it's slightly unethical to put people in a situation where you restrict their sleep to see the impact of that on these things. But there definitely are relationships, and as we've somewhat alluded to in the chat, right? We do know that the sleep cycle does impact regulation of hormonal releases that are involved in things like emotional regulation and stress regulation, and so it can have these types of impacts that then can have knock-on effects on anxiety and depression and so forth. So it is, it's a really challenging and a bit of a sad scenario, if you get in that vicious loop of poor sleep and you're having problems. But that's why it's so important, I think, to talk to doctors about it, to raise those things and raise the awareness. Because one of the good things now is there is a really good literature around the impacts of this and around a variety of different treatments that can be put out there to support people. It's just getting the right one for that individual. Because there's many factors, as I say, that could contribute to it.
Wow, yeah, it's amazing. Sounds like so much research that goes into sleep. So yeah, that's amazing. For some people in the MS community, a lot of them had talked to us about trying to get to sleep when they're experiencing pain, often like neuropathic pain or symptoms that cause pain. Have you got any tips to help people sleep when they're really struggling because of those reasons?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those ones where I would always encourage people to talk to the medical professionals they're working with, because I think you want to think alongside, I suppose, anything that any kind of treatments that you're engaging in already. But I mean, the main message, I suppose, from the sleep literature is to look at those kind of pain management strategies and trying to get those regular throughout, in the build up. And there are things like the possibility of thinking about, I suppose, techniques like certain relaxation exercises or gentle stretches, even things like certain forms of massage, right? These kind of moderate pressure, mild massages. Some of those are known to actually have positive impacts on sleep in general. You want to align that to the individual needs, to the person. And sometimes also with different age groups, you want to prioritize different types of massage and things like this. So it's quite a complex picture. So I think those are some really key components that can feed in. There are, of course, additional pain relievers that people might want to think about, but often those kind of medicated components are, you're thinking about that alongside, I suppose, whatever other treatments you might be on. So you've got to be really careful in that. So my general advice when it comes to anything like managing pain, or I suppose anything that might involve those kind of medical components, this would include things like supplements and stuff like that, which we may talk about, is to, I suppose, engage with the medical practitioners to try to understand, what's most optimal for you, because they're really, as I've alluded to already, that one size fits all thing is really hard to pin down. we may hear some wonderful health gurus out there telling us that certain things are magic and the right things to do, but my tendency would be to be a bit more cautious in that approach.
I think that's always a good approach, isn't it? It's to proceed with caution, particularly when anyone's telling you they've got the magic answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We also hear from people, and the other person who we spoke to on our podcast, Jo, she was saying that often she'll wake in the night, which could be due to pain or it could be due to other symptoms that are going on. So she'll kind of have that kind of insomnia kind of in the middle of the night. So they've been to sleep for a few hours and then wake back up and then struggle actually to get back to sleep. Do you have any kind of solutions to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so this idea of what we might call, I suppose, sleep fragmentation in a way, this idea we might wake up frequently during the night, and this is quite common in MS, right? I mean, it's quite a known common thing alongside other things like restless legs and things like this as well, and also some sleep apnea is quite often quite common. And I mean, I think for the waking in the night component, I suppose some of that is really going back to some of those routine points that I said. If you're lying there and you're stressing and straining over getting back to sleep, sometimes the better thing to do is actually sometimes to leave the bed, right, and actually go and, if you've gone 20 minutes or so, I mean, I say 20 minutes, I should, along with my message throughout, I should be really careful. I don't think there is a magic number in this, but you've got to step away sometimes and say, right, okay, let me try and control the anxiety. Let me try and control the focus side of this. Can I get that distraction in? Of course, getting that distraction in is really difficult because we've already said things like blue light might be a problem. So if you're there, I don't know, watching YouTube videos at 2 a.m. or something like that, that might not be the right option for you. But at the same time, for some people, they find that relaxing. Right, they might put it on and they might dim the screen, but they might listen to relaxing sounds and things like this through them. And so, it's really difficult to give you a kind of hard answer if this is what to do if you wake during a night. Apart from just, I suppose, try and follow those consistent sleep routines, and think about those triggers, those environmental influences that might be a challenge. So try not to get up and get too warm and stuff like this as well, because all of that changes your body regulation. Something some people also sometimes use is they do also sometimes look at things like white noise machines. So they try and play, a certain frequency of sound. And sometimes people find that useful. Again, I mean, it's some people do, some people don't, so we have to really look at it that way. But there is certainly evidence around some of those kind of components that people might want to think about. But often the idea is you might be doing those and keeping that on consistently anyway, right? So it's not necessarily about that sleep fragmentation point.
That's really interesting. I've heard of people using white noise for things like focusing, but not for sleeping. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does. Yeah. I mean, for some people swear by it. And I think all of us may also may come up with some examples where we might think about where white noise has had that effect. I don't know about you, but if I'm on a plane, often I'll just be something about the sound of the plane. I've just gone straight away.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, that's really true, isn't it? Or the train or something. Yeah. We were interested when we first sort of started chatting to you. Your work on I don't know if I'm using the right term here, so apologies, but that co-sleeping, so sort of sleeping next to someone. And is that the right term? Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, co-sleeping ultimately, yeah. I mean, we use it in our research around this idea of sleeping next to someone, which often actually you see it. If you were to Google it, I suppose, and you were to look at it, a lot of time people talk about co-sleeping in the context of like a parent or a caregiver and a child.
Right.
So kind of like, caregiver and infant kind of co-sleeping. But of course, throughout our adult lives, we can also, commonly, a number of people will sleep next to somebody, right? They might sleep next to a partner. And so, we do quite a lot of work looking at how, I suppose, sleeping next to that person may or may not influence your sleep schedule. So how well you sleep, your quality of sleep, but also the times you go to bed and wake up and the regularity of that. And if you're used to having a partner there, but suddenly your partner's not there one night, how does that impact your sleep quality? We also do a lot of work that looks at some of the behaviors before bed that might impact people's sleep. So, for instance, we've done some work looking at how sharing things like effective touch, so touch that is supportive, so maybe a hug or someone giving you a massage or things like this, how that might impact your sleep. And often you can find that some of these, they're non-sexual, they're more kind of intimate, tactile forms of touch, like a hug or a massage. These can have sometimes positive benefits on sleep for people, and actually quite commonly people do report that to be the case. So we look at those types of behaviors. There's sadly less research about people sleeping together than you might expect. So although that might be something that a lot of us do, most of the research on sleep, and indeed most of the research I've kind of been summarizing so far in my answers when they come to mind, are often done with people sleeping alone. So it's been saying, okay, but of course we do need to factor in there is often a second person in that, and if they're waking up, if they're fidgeting in the night, if they're struggling with temperature, that will have a knock-on effect on people's sleep, which I know may sound obvious to hear, but it's not often actually thought about in the scientific literature, of that knock-on effect of context. And then maybe some of what we might want to shift our thinking about when we talk about sleep hygiene as a couple is optimizing couple sleep hygiene, right? Because if my sleep hygiene is for me to go to bed at 10 p.m. and wind down beforehand, and my partner comes in, turns the light on at 11 p.m., that's obviously going to have these knock-on effects. So there's various dynamics to sleep that, again, and this goes back to the fact that when we see advice about sleep, and sometimes if we hear as a maybe I shouldn't use the term these kind of health gurus. Maybe that's not the right word. Maybe I'm being offensive to them. I hope not to be. But when you hear people on various forms of social media sometimes saying, well, this is the optimal, this is this is that, I think we need to keep in mind that there's a lot of nuance to that, which often actually even isn't picked up in the current research, right? Because research is focused on people sleeping alone. Not all of it, but a large proportion of it.
Yeah, I think I've definitely been guilty of being that partner who comes in and makes a load and bumps into stuff, and causing trouble. Another symptom of MS that people talk about a lot linked to sleep is fatigue.
Yeah.
Or MS fatigue. In terms of sleeping, so we often hear from people who will say, I've really been fatigued all day, and then when I try to go to sleep, I can't go to sleep. And I was wondering if you had any kind of tips around that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of, I might sound a bit like a broken record in my answers, but it's one of those, on the face of it, what might seem like a contradictory thing to say I've been fatigued all day, but I can't sleep at night. And that can be quite frustrating for people. And to a degree, if we think back about some of the answers and some of the things we've been talking about, that might point to sometimes where some of the problems can also stem, because the more frustrated we get, the more anxious we get, as we've said, that can have a really challenging impact on our sleep. So often, this kind of idea of high levels of stress or anxiety can make it difficult to, relax and unwind, even if we are exhausted during a day. And if we get those thoughts and those worries, that will start interfering. So again, thinking about those sleep hygiene habits can be really important. Things like, having inconsistent sleep schedules. So, irregular bedtime routines, maybe engaging in daytime naps, things like this, which can sometimes come. That might also have a knock-on effect in our sleep later on. So again, it's really about that consistency and encouraging, trying to set up that kind of healthy sleep habits for you and that routine for you. I think is one of the key parts to work around that. And of course, if you are, I think this goes back, as I said before, about talking to your medical professionals and things like that, because if you're on different medications as well, I spoke a bit about how things like caffeine might have an impact, how alcohol might have an impact, but of course, the medications we're on will often have different things in them as well. And we want to just double check how are those playing out. So, all of these things, certainly I'm not necessarily qualified enough to judge every individual's medication in any way, but a professional will be able to look at that and maybe say, well, there's an alternative here you could think about, and maybe this is having a consequence on your sleep. So I feel like maybe haven't directly answered your question, but maybe giving you an overview of some of the things to think about there.
No, that's great. I think that really taking away the points of having that routine and building those habits, even when it's really, really difficult and you're really struggling, actually just going back to those sleep hygiene habits can be really impactful. So
exactly,
that's great. Obviously we talked a bit about not wanting to recommend any magic pills or that kind of thing. But are there any kind of supplements that you would recommend that can have an impact on sleep?
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily recommend, as far as it's
Sure.
maybe been my norm.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean, and again, consult with your healthcare teams around this, because they'll have good advice probably about how things might interact with anything you are doing. But some of the things that people look at commonly, right, are things like melatonin supplements, chamomile is another one, valerian root. These are kind of things that people sometimes look at as options that people might want to do to work alongside their sleep routines and work alongside other factors. And so, I should note their effectiveness, it can vary, and it may well, and it likely will vary from person to person. As I said, they can interact with things, and I guess you want to be really careful with supplements about any possible side effects that might come from those supplements. So that's why I tend to be really mindful of thinking about saying there's a specific supplement that's ideal, and you should really talk to kind of qualified individuals about how that works. But what I would say in all this is keep in mind what we're talking about here is supplement, right? It's not a magic pill or anything like that here. It's meant to supplement by the definition. So a lot of it goes back to, if you're thinking about a supplement alongside those healthy sleep routines, those healthy behaviors, those kind of components, I think it'd be really challenging to think about one of these things working without having those wider factors in there, because one might knock the other off, if you see what I mean. So
right, yeah. So make sure you've got those habits, that routine, and maybe something alongside that could help, but make sure you go back to that routine first.
And also in a not dissimilar way, I mean, another thing that talking to a professional about can also maybe get some advice about things like sleeping tablets, because I know some people look at that as a route as well. And it's probably worth noting there that often when they're prescribed for use, they're prescribed for use in very short-term scenarios. They're not prescribed for long-term use and stuff like that. So because those long-term factors, there's various implications that come with that. And actually the way in which sleep tablets encourage sleep and the types of sleep cycles you go through can be slightly different to a normal sleep routine. So again, that's something I would really say talk to the medical professionals about, get the advice in that, and think about it if you're going to do it in the context of your wider sleep routine, right? So I think it's really unpacking it that way.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like really good advice. But yeah, so I think we've talked so much about so many different factors. If someone was really, really struggling, and again, I guess you could answer this by making sure you talk to a health professional, but are there any sort of common ways that sleep problems are treated?
Yeah, I mean, common ways. I mean, some of it is, I suppose, one of the common things is to explore some of the non-medication based approaches, actually. So some of these things like, looking at, I suppose it is behavioral change. So it's looking at those, it's looking at the routines, it's looking at those dynamics. Some of the ways are looking at how you might engage in things like gentle massage and certain forms of things like that can kick in. There's other components which we've alluded to already about some of the more therapeutic types of interventions that can happen. So some of the things like CBT, thinking about how people can manage and regulate their anxiety. So I guess in essence, what we're kind of saying here is there's lifestyle changes. There's sometimes these more psychological interventions. There can of course be medical interventions. So there are those kind of prescribed medications, but those I would say tend to be a kind of a last resort, and definitely under supervision. And of course, there are sleep clinics, right? There's sleep specialists. There's the experts out there who can give really good advice on this, and they all have different specialties. Some focus on breathing techniques, some focus on the behavior, some focus on, some of the movement techniques. So it's worth kind of exploring that as a whole.
Yeah, brilliant. It sounds like there's so many different ways that you can approach it, so many different things before you get to the point where you get to that point when you need to take that extra medication. But yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I just had another question. So recently someone was saying, and again, it may have been online, but they were saying that what you do in the morning can really impact your sleep. So they were sort of talking about getting vitamin D, like maybe getting out into the sun. Is there any sort of essence?
Yeah, so if people happen to follow the Huberman Lab podcast, which is quite a prominent, famous podcast at the moment, that's certainly something that's talked about a lot in that. That might have been where you heard about it, getting out in the first half an hour of day, setting your circadian cycle, right? So the light that comes into your system shifts your system and prepares it up throughout the day. And there are a lot of people that promote that. I have to admit, I've not dug deep enough into the scientific literature around it to give a kind of qualified opinion on how strong that evidence is, but there are some, very big figures in the field who do really encourage that. And this idea about, moving your body, because it's also about body movement as well, can often set your cycle. So there is this component about that, and to a degree, I suppose it's a wider message, right? It's about the fact that, and it goes back to what we've been talking about throughout, that sleep, although it happens at the end of the day, something that we often do, it's not just the act of that moment of getting in bed and falling asleep, right? It's the behaviors throughout the day. It's the routines that we set that are having these impacts. And, I've often in the conversation now been talking a bit more about, well, even thinking to the early afternoon with the coffee and things like that. But you can think about that as a whole day routine, right? What is the whole day routine? There's an element of me that gets a bit cautious even about this, even now when I'm talking about it, because if you get people starting to think really carefully and monitoring every little detail of what they're doing throughout the day to get to sleep, you can also see how that might lead them to start to ruminate more about it and stress more about it later. So there's a real balance in this, and it's a very delicate one, and particularly if you're having sleep problems because of how anxiety-inducing that can be in itself. If you're in a situation where it's like, oh gosh, well, I didn't wake up this morning, go out for a walk 30 minutes at sunset, that means my sleep's ruined for the rest of the day. I think we want to avoid that type of cycle being put out, right? The point being is, just because you miss that, there are other opportunities to regulate your sleep throughout the day. It's just kind of getting back on the horse and making sure that we maintain as good as possible that kind of consistent routine, and trying to stick to the good practices that you might introduce. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think I'm definitely going to take that away, that you're saying as good as you can on that day, get back to those routines when you can. And obviously, as you were saying, no one is a sleep saint. We all, do some of these things sometimes, and maybe not all of them. Maybe we sometimes have alcohol intake or caffeine intake. But when you can, get back to the routine.
Indeed.
Yeah. I think we've covered so many different topics. It's been so interesting talking to you, Michael. But I was just sort of seeing, are there any kind of final thoughts that you might have, any sort of just top takeaways that people listening to this could think about?
Yeah. You're right. We have covered a lot. So at risk of repeating it, I suppose, my message to people is that, I think when we're talking about sleep, it isn't necessarily the behavior that happens right in the bedroom when you're going to sleep. It is connected to activities that we're doing throughout the day, and there's a range of steps that we can take throughout the day to have kind of, I suppose, healthy habits that might help us sleep at night. And I can totally understand how people get anxious and stressed around sleep difficulties, and how that can sometimes, ruminating on that may become even harder when we've had poor sleep, but there are opportunities and routes for support. And I would encourage people, to talk openly about any sleep problems they're having, talk to their medical practitioners, who will be able to give good advice around it, because there is increasingly really good advice and options out there for people to help support sleep, whether that's, behavioral, whether that's kind of more medical or supplement based, a mixture of both. I think the key now is the scientific community and the medical community really understand the importance of sleep, and as such, there's a lot of resources out there that people can draw on.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I feel like there's been such a wealth of knowledge, and I've definitely learnt a lot. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, brilliant. And we look forward to seeing whatever you're up to in the future, and just a huge thank you from us all again. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Hello and welcome back.
Wow, I'm still a little bit FOMO because you did both of these interviews. They're really interesting. I do find like the topic of sleep is just that it comes up over and over again, pretty much on a daily basis on our social medias, isn't it? So many people that are struggling. After listening to Joe and talking about that sort of jerk awake, I find it really interesting because I do the same. And I have tried to look it up before, because I thought before that it was maybe some sleep apnea or something that woke me up. But I think it is some sort of, I can't remember, I looked it up now. It's like hypnotic limb movement. And I find that it actually helps me a little bit if I try to sleep on my side instead of my back. I like sleeping on my back, but when I do that, I tend to do that kind of jerk much more. And if I'm on my side, does it less. So I don't know. That would be my tips. Obviously not a health professional, but that would be my tips to Joe, to try sleeping on your side, see if that could help.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you say that. I mean, I'm sure Joe has tried lots of different things by the sound of it, but it's interesting that particular way sort of helps you, isn't it? And I think when we asked for a bit of a call out on social media, people were asking a lot of questions about sleep, but also people had lots of different sort of tips and tricks that seemed to work for them. So whether that was sort of cutting out caffeine or cutting down on caffeine, or things like massages that Michael talked about as well, or reducing that blue light from screens, which I'm really bad. Like the last thing that I'm doing in the day is looking through my phone.
I was just about to ask if you since talking to them have like tried to do a bit more of a sleep routine, or are you still?
Yeah. I'm much more aware of it, Helena. Yeah. Let's put it that way. Yeah, I'm definitely much more aware of it. And I think definitely like reading at bedtime is definitely going to be a lot better. Like trying to read a book as opposed to me flicking through social media. It's probably never going to be a good move, is it? But,
no. It's funny because during Christmas I had a bit of an eye injury, so I find since then that I struggle looking at screens or TV just before, when my eyes get just really tired, and it's almost to the point where I sort of say, oh, I've had it now. So I've actually kind of enforced a bit of a bedtime routine, which often means that I had to put in some eye drops in my eyes, and then I have this like it's like an eye mask type thing that I put on for which you heat up in the microwave. So I put that on my eyes, over my eyes for about 10 minutes, and while I got that, I normally listen to like an audiobook or something. And I do find that kind of just 10-15 minutes of kind of calming myself down before I fall asleep really has made a difference in kind of going to sleep. I still struggle with waking up and getting up and all that sort of stuff, but it sort of has calmed me down quite a lot. So as much as I hated having that eye injury, it sort of forced me to change my bedtime routine, and which has been quite positive actually.
That sounds great. That I mean, obviously, apologies to hear about the situation, but actually, that sounds like a really good routine. That's what Michael was saying, wasn't it? Like, get into a routine, just try and go back to your routine when you come off it. You might not be able to do it every single day, but try to keep things the same as much as you can and keep those habits. But Yeah, no, it sounds very calming almost. Maybe I need to try
I think
switching everything off, just listening with an eye mask, maybe.
you need to find that children's story you were talking about, and then have that.
Just read that every day. Yeah.
Just read that before you better. Well, they do say about like listening to the things that are not too exciting. I know that there's like lots of these sleep stories that you can get on, you know, different apps like Audible and Calm or what have you, that actually is like boring stories. So not saying that kid story is a boring story, but maybe something that isn't like, oh, I want to listen to the next chapter, but just some kind of pleasant voice that drones on in the background. That's might be something to try.
Yeah, and I hope no one listening to this is like, oh, I know what I could listen to, so it would be really boring to put me to sleep.
No, we are far too exciting.
No,
surely.
we're way too excited. I know, yeah, absolutely.
But if you are falling asleep to this podcast, well done you.
No, you can listen to whatever you like, of course. Yeah.
But when I listened to this talk, I actually thought a little bit about a previous podcast that we had with Charlie Peel, who, when we were talking about making small changes and how they have a big impact on you. And she was really making a point on how important it is to get your sleep sorted out. And she said it's taken her years to get her sleep sorted out. And like I said, my sleep's always been quite bad. So you have to sort of try and take some active steps to sort it out. So I would really like to actually revisit this topic in a future podcast and talk maybe a little bit more about treatment and interventions. So if you're listening to this and you have actually been to a sleep clinic or you've tried out any of these different kind of things that we've been talking about, or, you know, some people have to resort to taking medication and some people do things like meditation. If you've done anything like this, it would be really interesting to hear your story. So please do get in touch with us. You can drop us an email on comms@mstrust.org.uk. But I think we'd like to end on this bit, which is from our website, actually. Which says it's important to treat sleep disorders in MS, as this can lead to improvements in other MS symptoms. And this is especially true for fatigue, memory and concentration problems, depression and pain. This in turn can lead to improved quality of life and reduction in disability. So it's really important that, you know, it's kind of like people just get on with it, having bad sleep and just struggle on, but it's really important, especially when you have MS, to really take it serious. And then also many of the MS symptoms which can affect sleep are treatable. So speak to your MS team to discuss your option if you're not receiving treatment for them. And like Nick mentioned at the start, if any medications are affecting your sleep, you can discuss whether there are alternatives available or whether changing the timing of taking them could help. We've seen people do that on the Facebook group. I know somebody was really struggling with nighttime sweating, and they were looking into taking their medications in a different timing together with their MS nurse. So they changed it around on how they were taking it, and actually it seemed to improved a little bit for them. But obviously, don't experiment with things like this without talking to a health professional first. That's really important.
Yeah, definitely. Just to echo that, I think that was the sort of key point from Michael as well, was that if you are really struggling, do try and talk to a health professional before you make any drastic changes, particularly with things like medication. It's really important. Yeah, definitely. If you've still got questions about MS and sleep, you know that you can definitely get in contact with us at the MS Trust. So you can go ahead and get in touch with our helpline, and they're available from Monday to Friday, apart from UK bank holidays, between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of those hours, you can leave us a message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So do go ahead and call that number. It's 0800 032 3839. Or you can email us, that's ask@mstrust.org.uk. Or you can even get in touch with us on any of our social media channels as well, which are Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and TikTok too. So Could be a question about sleep, could be a question about any other aspect of life with MS. So do get in touch with us.
Yep. And this podcast can be found on most places where you would find your podcasts, really, but Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts and Amazon Music. And please, let us know what you thought of this podcast, what you think about breaking it down in general, and maybe topics that you would like to hear about. And if you have indeed been to a sleep clinic, we would love to hear from you. So do get in touch. And otherwise, I guess we'll let you all go to sleep now then. If it's the night when you're listening to this, if it's the day, try to avoid the daytime sleepiness. Bye.